Hello, and welcome to M4LU, presented by Moms for Liberty. We're here to translate complex topics into more easily understood content, giving you, the parents, grandparents, and every American citizen, the key facts and information you need to empower you to fight back against government overreach, especially as it impacts our kids in schools. Hi, I'm Melissa Karwowski, Program Director of M4LU. Each month, we'll focus on a single topic, ideology, or issue that impacts our kids, schools, and communities. We'll approach it from multiple angles, starting with a 101 intro lecture, followed by a 102 course that goes a little deeper on the topic. If available, we'll do a virtual watch party of a film relating to the topic, and finally culminate with a monthly book club discussion. Best of all, every event will have live Q&A with experts in the field to help us make sense of it all. We understand this can be a lot to digest, but don't worry, we've got your back. You'll find a corresponding toolkit in the resource library at m4lu.org. In addition to recordings of all monthly events, each toolkit will include a curated smart book, presentation slides that can be used at chapter meetings, related white papers, articles, podcasts, and so much more. Now, before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. Depending on what device you are using, there should be an audience chat and Q&A feature at the right of your screen. Please comment, interact with your fellow audience members, and be sure to submit those questions to our amazing guests. It is so valuable to get this direct interaction with them, so please take advantage of it. As a warning, rude or demeaning comments will get you removed from this event, and you will not be permitted to re-enter. Now, of course, the legal reminder that the opinions of the guests and any media content shared are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of M4LU or Moms for Liberty. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please like, share, and subscribe to help spread the word and support our mission. We try to keep our resources affordable and accessible to all, but if you would like to donate, please visit m4lu.org. Thank you again. Now let's jump over to the event. Hello, joyful warriors, family, and friends. We are so glad that you've joined us tonight at M4LU for Gender 102. So this is the second of 4 events that will tackle April's topic, which is gender ideology. Now, as I said last week, this was my red pill. This is the one that really sent me down the rabbit hole and just opened my eyes to realize how absolutely insane everything is going on right now. If you missed it at last week's event, Gender 101, you can check it out at the live stream recording, that is, on the Moms for Liberty YouTube channel. If you just go to YouTube and type in M4LU Gender 101, that's M4, the number 4, LU Gender 101, just type it in right into YouTube and the recording should come right up. So last week we heard about queer theory from Logan Lansing that really paved the way for gender ideology to be accepted. Then we also heard from Mia Hughes, who presented on the absolute medical catastrophe that is happening globally from this social contagion that is taking over the world. And then finally, Colin Wright brought us back to reality as he talked more about the binary of sex, but then it did address how queer theory is attacking that. So it was a great presentation and followed by some fantastic Q&A. So I definitely encourage you to check it out. Now, tonight, I am really excited to bring to you 2 major players in the gender ideology space, both with great history. They have so much experience here, but really come at the topic from a slightly different angle. So I think we're going to have a great conversation tonight. So without further ado, allow me to introduce my first guest. Chris Elston, better known as Billboard Chris, has become one of the most recognizable figures in the fight against gender ideology. What started as a personal investigation into puberty blockers turned into a global campaign, one that has put him face to face with Antifa, law enforcement, and political activists. He's been attacked, arrested, and censored, but he refuses to stop speaking out. I'm a particular fan of his definition of dad that you can see on Twitter or X profile, which says, "Dad, a human male who protects his kids from gender ideology, traveling the world to stop child transition, one conversation at a time." Please welcome Chris Elston, or Billboard Chris. Hey there.
Silly me, I hadn't unmuted myself. How's it
I
going,
thought
Melissa? Thank you so much for having me.
I am so glad to have you here. And you're just coming back from Australia, right? You were over in Australia for a while?
Yes, I was there for almost 2 weeks, which is far too long to be gone, but I had a court case or a hearing at what's called their administrative review tribunal because I was a bad boy about a year ago and I called a woman online, which got me in trouble with Australia's e-safety commissioner. This is a government bureaucrat. She's actually an American woman named Julia McGrant. And her job down under is to censor the internet. She decides what Australians can see and say. So I criticized the appointment of a woman named Teddy Cook. This is a woman who says she's a man. And I had quoted this Daily Mail article a little over a year ago where she was promoting all sorts of inappropriate things, bondage and bestiality and drugs and all sorts of stuff, which naturally got her appointed to the World Health Organization, tasked with drafting healthcare policy for trans identified children and adults. So I rightly criticized her, as we all should, and they ordered X to take my post down. X refused, but they forwarded me the takedown notice and they had to geo block it in Australia. So nobody in Australia can see that post. I then filed
Wow.
an appeal with what's called their administrative review tribunal. Elon Musk also filed an appeal, and these two separate appeals were being heard as one last week. I was there for 5 days of trial because of my 35-word post. And I did some other things around the country, meeting with several politicians and having some street conversations and almost getting myself arrested as well. It was fun.
Well, I think that almost is like your calling card to almost get arrested at this point. But you made some great conversations. If you guys haven't seen it, you should definitely should go check it out on X. There have been some really thought-provoking conversations. Do you know real quick before I introduce our next guest, do you know when you're going to hear back on your case?
With the deputy president of the tribunal told us probably the second half of the year. So
Oh, wow.
it's going
Okay.
to be a few months. Yeah, it takes a few
Well,
months to decide if we can call a woman or not.
fingers crossed. Hopefully,
Yeah,
reality will win. Okay. Well, I'm so glad
eventually.
you're here.
Thank you.
Our next guest I'm excited to introduce is Jay Richards. Jay Richards, PhD, is a dynamic force in public policy and thought leadership, serving as the director of the Richard and Helen DeVos Center for Life, Religion, and Family at the Heritage Foundation. He's authored New York Times bestsellers like Infiltrated and Indivisible, as well as producing compelling documentaries for PBS. Jay's insightful articles have appeared in prestigious publications such as the Harvard Business Review and Wall Street Journal. A seasoned media personality, he's been featured on iconic shows like Larry King Live and Fox and Friends. And of course, if you haven't caught it, you definitely should look up his memorable debate with Christopher Hitchens at Stanford University, which was broadcast live to hundreds of churches across North America. Welcome, Jay, to the show.
Thanks so much, Melissa. It's great to be with you. And of course, good to be with my good friend, Chris Elston. Chris and I have been co conspirators on this for a long time. But as you said, we sort of focus on different things. I'm here in my office at the Heritage Foundation, only a couple, 300 yards, I guess, from at least the Senate office building. And so most of my work in this area has been working on legislation, either developing model legislation or supporting it or testifying or bringing together the disparate elements and people and organizations that have been a part of this fight, including, of course, Moms for Liberty. And you said this issue was, Melissa, was your red pill, and this is the red pill for a lot of people. I know a lot of the Moms for Liberty, it started in 2020 during the lockdowns when the kids were forced to stay home, teachers didn't want them in, or forced to wear masks. But the silver lining is that a lot of those same moms found out what was happening in their schools and got a rude awakening and an introduction to the ways in which gender ideology has worked its way in, not just to the health curriculum, but everywhere. I mean, it's managed to find its way into math and social studies and geography. And that, I think, ultimately has led to the pushback that we've seen and the major vibe shift from, honestly, even 3.5 or 4 years ago to now is just a radical change in both the public attitudes and the laws in this area.
And you have a really well, first of all, I have to say it's pretty awesome that your red pill also was this. I feel very connected with you on that. Well, actually, for both of you, because I think, Chris, that this sort of brought you in as well.
Mhm.
Um, I'm curious, Jay, did you ever expect to end up doing this? Did you think you were going to be fighting this fight?
No, this was absolutely, I had no plan for this. Actually, I was teaching at Catholic University right here in Washington, D.C., a few miles away. But my friend Ryan Anderson, who was at Heritage at the time, wrote this 2018 book a lot of us read, When Harry Became Sally, which made me really alive to how important it was for policy. But, at the time, I didn't think, well, I won't play a role in this. It's important. I'm glad Ryan's doing it. And then during the lockdowns, I happened to read another book that really broke the story, I think, for general audiences on gender medicine for minors and what was happening to girls in California. I read this before it was published, and it was the book by Abigail Schreier, Irreversible Damage. That was the book that sort of blew up my mind. And honestly, I just thought, okay, I got to work on this somehow. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I told Ryan, hey, maybe if you leave Heritage at some point, I'll apply for your job. And if Heritage hires me, then I can join you in this fight. That's literally what happened. And so that's how I ended up at Heritage in the middle of this thing, and sort of feel like I'm sort of sowing what others have planted. But just to be sort of on the ground right at the beginning when, honestly, I'll say now, Chris and I remember a meeting we had with a friend in August of 2022, talking to Republican staffers on the Hill in Washington, D.C. And you could tell from their body language, they just did not want to talk about this issue. We said, no, we got the polls. This is it's a majority issue in our favor. They just were uncomfortable for whatever reason, but we had a couple of breaks. I think the pictures of Rachel Levin helped. I think the pictures of Leah Thomas beating or tying Riley Gaines in the NCAA tournaments for swimming. It was just a couple of things like that. And suddenly the dam broke, and what we were telling Republicans, but they weren't doing anything about, suddenly they realized, okay, let's do the right thing. And it turns out the right thing is also politically a winner for us. So, everything's changed in 4 years.
Thank God. I feel a little bit of hope. It's interesting. I love that you were having conversations because I know that, Chris, that's really what you do, which I think is, I give you so much credit. Every time I watch your videos, I just like the snippets, everything. And so for those who are watching who don't know your history, can you just do the elevator pitch version of how did you end up with a name like Billboard Chris?
I used to be a financial advisor. I had a real job managing money and doing all that stuff. But that was boring and not my passion anyway. This is much more fun. But no, I'm a dad. I have two girls. They're 13 and 15 years old now. When I first started learning about this back in 2019, they were just 7 and 9. And I was just living a normal life. I wasn't paying attention to all these culture war things. I'd been watching the culture spiral downhill for many years because I'd been a financial advisor since 2001. And when you're managing investments, you have to pay attention to everything. And so there was a lot about this world, and is a lot about this world, that I don't like the direction we're heading in. But then when I learned that they're trying to do childhood sex changes, people say, what is your stake in this? Why are you so involved? You don't have a child affected. You don't need one to get involved. Anyone can get involved in this. They're cutting the body parts off of children. That's all you need to know. They're stopping puberty in perfectly healthy children. If your jaw doesn't hit the floor when you hear that, I suggest maybe you need to do some interior searches into yourself, because your jaw should be hitting the floor. This is totally outrageous. For me, this is the greatest child abuse in modern history, certainly modern medicine history. You have to go back pretty far. I know some cultures were sacrificing children to their gods. We're not quite there, but it's the next level. And we think we're this advanced species today because of all our technology, but psychologically we're the same. And we're still prone to the same things that cause cultish ideas to grab hold. And for me, this is basically, for all practical purposes, the giant cult that swept across the Western world. So I started learning about puberty blockers. I came across this term, I couldn't believe it. Then the cross-sex hormones, the surgeries, the more you read, the crazier this gets. And I think for a lot of people, gender ideology is so big. It's pushed in all the schools. It's pushed by all these governments. It's pushed by all these international organizations. All these human rights codes are being rewritten. Legislation is being passed everywhere to make it illegal to discriminate against someone based on their gender identity. And that sounds nice at the first time you hear it. Oh yeah, we shouldn't discriminate against people. Well, what does that mean? That means you can't stop a man from going into a woman's prison. It means you can't stop a man from going into a woman's rape shelter. You can't stop them from going into women's sports. Of course, we should discriminate based on sex. There are sex-based protections for females for a reason. And it's a different issue than what's going on with the kids, but with the adults, with these males specifically who transition, a lot of them are a danger to women. This isn't some inherent identity that they have. For them, a lot of them, this is a sexual fetish called autogynephilia, which breaks down into 3 root words, which literally means attraction to self as a woman. And, we can get into all sorts of weeds here, and this gets really dark really fast. But bottom line is we need to be protecting women from this. And the greatest harm that's being done, and this isn't even close, is the harm that's being done to tens of thousands of children, hundreds of thousands who now think they're born in the wrong body, tens of thousands who've been medicalized. We can't allow it to occur. And there's this expression that politics is downstream from culture. I think that's largely true, as we've seen in our own conversations with some of these politicians, and Jay has many more than I do. They didn't want to touch this issue until they learned about it, and really until we got much of the population on board with us. And we did that by educating them, by exposing the harms that were being done, by exposing the words of these trans activists themselves, these doctors at these hospitals, like these Boston Children's Hospital videos that I tweeted out. Those went extremely viral, and it started this cascading effect where people started looking into these other children's hospitals. And for the first time, people who knew there was something kind of shady going on, they learned exactly what was going on, and they didn't like it. And thanks to organizations like Moms for Liberty, we now have hundreds of thousands of parents pushing back, speaking up, and that makes it more safe for the politicians to speak up. And when they learn this is a winning issue for them politically, as long as we give them the words for how to speak about this, they will speak about it. And that's what we're seeing happening.
I love that you do that, that you give the way you said that of you giving them the words. And because I feel like the two of you, you're like right and left hand working together on this issue in such a great way because Jay Chris, you are also having conversations with politicians, but I feel like it's so much more policy side. And then Chris being willing to stand in front of very angry people on the streets and quite literally putting yourself at risk. Just to have these conversations with people and challenge their way of thinking. I think that's so awesome that you guys are both doing that. So I just have to say thank you personally as a woman.
My pleasure. And to answer your question, I do this, I get very distracted. I put up a billboard back in 2020 that said, I love J.K. Rowling. It got taken down after one day because a Vancouver politician said it was hate speech. J.K. Rowling, of course, has spoken out about this. So my whole objective was to start conversations. I then did a whole bunch of billboards throughout the US. But then in Canada, where I was stuck at the time because of COVID, we couldn't even leave the country. I thought, well, they can take down my billboard, but they can't take one off my back. So I had some signs made. And I went and stood where the original billboard was, literally a personification of the billboard. And then I started traveling Canada, having conversations, reaching parents one-on-one, and haven't stopped. I quit my job. I started traveling into the US when the borders opened. Now I travel internationally because it turns out having conversations is the only way we're going to stop this. So I have them and I try to start millions more.
It's not only just good TV, as they say, it's so important that you're doing that. So, okay, I have a question that I'm not sure if either of you know the answer to this, but I'm hoping someone can. This was actually a bit of a hangover from Gender 101. And that is, when did the psychiatric field of medicine switch from calling this gender dysphoria, like an issue, to actually acknowledging it as just, what is it now? It's because it's not considered a problem anymore.
Well, it's a bit complicated, but I mean, the dirty little secret is the so-called Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. That sounds really fancy, like it's this sort of encyclopedia of all the diseases that psychiatrists have discovered. Not really. It's more accurate to think of it as the billing code that psychiatrists need in order to get paid for insurance. And so you need a distinct diagnosis. And because of that, because it's not sort of the manual of the things we've discovered, like, a need for an open heart surgery or breast cancer, or, definable things. It's very subject to politics and to ideology. So prior to 2013, there was a diagnosis called gender identity disorder, which is actually kind of self-explanatory. It's basically if, say, a boy was confused and thought he was a girl, then it's a disorder because he's confused about who he actually is. And so that would be the disorder. So if that's the disorder, well, of course, the way to help him, if he's a boy, would be through presumably therapy to try to get him comfortable with who he actually is. But the APA talked explicitly to sort of gender ideologues and gender activist organizations because they were sort of thinking, okay, maybe this is insensitive. And so they literally got suggestions from the ideologues on the other side about what this should be. And so in 2013, still it's in the DSM-5, they took out gender identity disorder and they put in something called gender dysphoria. And gender dysphoria just means basically severe discomfort with your gender. And there's this kind of backstory here, but the way they would define it is when you feel psychological distress at your sex, between your sex assigned at birth, right? So sex is gone. It's just the thing the doctor imposes on you, and your so-called gender identity. Okay, now, so if what you really are is just this idea, this idea of yourself in your head called a gender identity, and sex is nothing more than kind of an imposition that a doctor assigns to you, well, then how do you fix that? How do you fix the discomfort between these two things? Well, now the way to fix it is just to relieve the discomfort. And if what you really are is this sort of disembodied gender self, then the proper therapy would be so-called gender affirming care, where you change the body, you change the pronouns, you change the social surroundings, you literally remove body parts to get the body to conform to this internal sense of gender. That's how people can, with a straight face, refer to these ghoulish experiments, frankly, and interventions as something called gender affirming care. It's basically saying, okay, the main thing that you are is this sense of yourself inside yourself. So the way we fix it is, if necessary, we remove body parts and we refashion this meat suit that's not really who you are. I mean, that's what's behind this. So strangely, a change of terms in the DSM-5 essentially summarizes this sort of takeover of the psychiatric profession and other medical professions of the categories of gender ideology. I mean, I don't know how to emphasize this enough, that medical organizations historically, I could give you multiple examples in the 20th century, get captured by ideologies. And so their guidelines and their practices that they advise are determined not by the best science, they're determined by ideology. This is just an obvious current example of that. If it was a century ago, it would have been eugenics. But for a lot of normal people that trust doctors and medical organizations, hard to get your mind around the idea that the American Academy of Pediatrics could get taken over by a bunch of crazy ideologues, except that that's exactly what's happened.
It's exactly what's happened, and it's exactly what always happens. Mm-hmm. This is absolutely nothing new. Activists are always hijacking the psychiatric profession. Multiple personality disorder is completely debunked. It doesn't exist. There's no such thing as multiple personalities. We saw just this week, they're now acknowledging, oh, maybe we shouldn't have given hundreds of thousands of boys ADHD medications. No, you shouldn't have. They were just boys being boys. And they don't all have some disorder called ADHD just because they don't want to sit at a desk for 7 hours a day. That's a very unnatural human behavior for a small child, especially for some of these boys. I mean, they did lobotomies for decades. It finally ended. The last patient they did one on died. That never had any scientific credentials to it. But you had these extremely distressed people, some of whom now, after cutting away at the fibers of their prefrontal cortex, appeared to be calmer. And it was hailed as this miracle cure, and it was popularized by the media, just as this has been popularized by the media. And these activists want to have it both ways. They want to say this isn't a disorder at all now, because this is just someone's natural identity. Well, if it's not a disorder, the next step and what's happening is, well, you shouldn't even get therapy for these kids before you do the so-called gender affirming care, which is really sex denying harm, which is what it is. But now the trend is, well, you shouldn't even suggest therapy, because to suggest therapy is to say that there is something wrong with their gender identity. Well, gender identity is all nonsense.
It is. But it is, Chris said, they want it both ways. They still want insurance to cover the procedures, though. Right. And so it needs to be considered a disorder for that purpose.
Right.
But, the other side, we shouldn't treat as a disorder. So pick one.
And then what we have today, too, they're not always coding this as gender dysphoria. They'll code it as something else to get around laws. So it's all just very sneaky and it gets a bit complicated. But ultimately, you just need to understand gender identity ideology is entirely nonsense. I say all the time we have two sexes, zero genders, and infinite personalities. I think that's
I like that.
an easy way to understand what's really going on here. We used gender as a synonym for sex, but the left just don't do that anymore. They say
Mhm.
your gender is entirely separate from your sex. So then ask them to define what gender is then. And you're going to get all sorts of answers because they can't really do it. It's ultimately just a feeling. But of course, our sex isn't a feeling. And then it all comes down to stereotypes, which I think Jay's going to get into here with maybe some of his slides.
Yeah, that is actually one of my favorite questions you ask, that I would encourage everyone to just take a minute and think about. And that is, what does it feel like to be a man, or to be a woman? Because that's the typical response, right? Is, oh, well, a woman is anyone who feels like they identify as a woman, or a man, whichever way. And it really challenges people to think about how to actually answer that. And it's
Mhm.
always nonsensical answers. I think that's really an interesting point.
Yeah, they'll say, well, girls like nail polish and pink and long hair.
Mhm.
Okay. So if a boy likes nail polish, does that puts him on the girl spectrum? They all know
Well,
that's
and
ridiculous.
you make a
Yeah,
good point with that right there, of it being stereotypes, which, Jay, if
right.
you want to speak to that, absolutely.
Yeah,
Because I just have to
yes.
say, I think it's awful that we fought
Mhm.
stereotypes for so long, and now they're back.
Absolutely. I mean, that's essentially what happens when you dispense with the category of sex as a real thing, because that's what gender ideology ultimately does. It basically says sex isn't a real thing we observe out there in the world, so that there just are males and females. These is sort of a convention that doctors and sort of Western medical professionals, they started attaching certain body parts to this thing they called male and other body parts to this thing called female, but it's not a real thing. What's real is this kind of internal subjective sense. But of course, the previous argument, the argument that women had to overcome, was that this idea that we're sort of defined by our cultural stereotypes. So if you're a woman, well, you shouldn't like to play sports and you shouldn't want to have a job outside your home, or whatever it is. But what was the argument? It was that, well, the biology, the fact that you're female, shouldn't so narrowly dictate all of these other categories, maybe some of which perhaps, physical strength and things like that, or preferences. Yeah, there's sort of average preferences that women tend to have more than men. It doesn't mean that if you're, say, a young woman and you don't really want dolls and you want to play with Legos, right? That just means you're atypical as a female. You're just slightly less, not at the top of the bell curve. It doesn't mean that makes you a male. But if you don't have the category male and female anchored, you have no way of distinguishing the reality of sex from the stereotypes. So they get rid of that. Now all they have is stereotypes. And so if you look at some of these gender identity questionnaires, as Chris said, it sounds like an exaggeration, but it's like, well, if you like to wear nail polish and you like your hair to be long, and you like to play with dolls, that means that you're a woman. I mean, it's literally all you have is these bundles of stereotypes. And so it's not only completely incoherent philosophically, it's profoundly regressive. And you can especially see that with some of these adult men that dress up as drag queens as women. No women look like drag queens, right?
No.
They're sort of really bizarre parodies of the female form, which is really exactly what's happening. And unfortunately, it seems discourteous to sort of point that out. But I think, ultimately, we need to just call a spade a spade.
Yes, and Dr. Jeremy Carswell, a woman who's the director of the Gender Multi-Specialty Clinic at Boston Children's Hospital, which was the number one ranked pediatric hospital in the country. I think it's number two now.
Mhm.
But she says that things that determine your gender are things like a little girl who tries to pee standing up, a boy who pees sitting down, playing with the opposite gendered toys, or trying on a sibling's clothing. These are all signs that your 3-year-old is transgender and can be treated. That's all
Wow.
patently insane. But that is the absolute crux of gender ideology. That's all it comes down to is ridiculous stereotypes.
As a tomboy, former tomboy, I should say. I'm quite
Mhm.
girly now, but as a former tomboy, I am quite relieved that I grew up when I did and not in this generation because I probably very well, I don't think I would have been in my family, but I very likely could have been, facing some of this angst or the pressure
Yeah.
that we're seeing nowadays.
Yes, and
Yeah.
then when we look at the kids who show up to these gender clinics, so there's all these ridiculous stereotypes, and I give these speeches and I'll ask the women in the audience who was a tomboy growing up, and it's more than half the hands go up in the audience. And that's great. It's fun climbing trees and playing in the dirt.
Yes.
But the kids who show up at these gender clinics, yeah, maybe these girls are tomboys, but what else is going on? These are kids with autism in a
Yeah.
majority of cases. 35% of the kids at the Tavistock had moderate to severe autism. That doesn't include the mild cases. I was speaking recently with my friends at Campbell Miller Payne. This is a law firm suing for all these young people who've been harmed. They're looking at 150 other cases right now, in addition to the 13 lawsuits they have ongoing. And in almost every
Wow.
case, these kids have autism. But according to all the systematic reviews that have been done, like the CAS review in England, other countries have done these as well: Finland, Sweden, Germany, Canada just had a couple, but the most extensive one was in England. Parents had a 10 times greater likelihood of being sex offenders. These kids are often victims of sexual abuse, not just from their parents, of course, but from other people. Autism is very prevalent. Other personality disorders are very prevalent, abuse and trauma. And 70% of the kids at the gender clinic there had 5 or more coexisting mental health comorbidities. So there's always something else going on, and gender is being treated as the cure-all for all of it. When in reality, what's just happening is you have these autistic kids who are struggling with other things in life. Maybe they don't have the best home life. They're the most vulnerable children in our society, kids who are often in state care. And now they're being told that the only way they're going to find happiness is by changing their body. It's so bad.
You mentioned the CAS review. For those who maybe haven't heard about it, could one of you explain real quick what that is and what was decided with it?
Yeah, yeah, and so the UK is sort of it was ahead of us on this. So earlier entry into the gender medicine, the so-called gender affirming care, but also quicker to exit it. And so the difference between the United States and the UK is, of course, the UK has a highly centralized, socialized medical system. So there's exactly one pediatric gender clinic in the country called the Tavistock, where all the kids that were diagnosed with gender dysphoria, they'd be referred to this clinic. In the U.S., by reference, it's like about 78 or 79 of these clinics plus 600 Planned Parenthood. So the two different situations, of course. The benefit is that they had all the data, and so they noticed that from 2009 to 2019, they had about a 44 times increase. So that'd be a 4,400% increase in the number of girls that were being referred to the Tavistock clinic. So from 2009 to 2019, well, 44 times more kids. That's a signal that something is happening. There was a lawsuit. Finally, a prominent pediatrician named Hilary Cass was asked by the National Health System in the UK to do a review, to do an investigation. So she spent several years on it. The final report, called the Cass Review or the Cass Report, was released. It's 388 pages long, and it's accompanied effectively by 8 systematic reviews that were published simultaneously in BMJ, the British Medical Journal, all showing, sort of testing different aspects of gender affirming care to say, okay, well, does social transition, does that help kids? Do puberty blockers, do those help them adjust to their bodies and release their distress? And what they found is, well, the costs and the risks of these things are profound. There don't seem to be any. It doesn't seem to be any good evidence that there are actual benefits of it. That's what the Cass review found. And as Chris said, there have been other systematic reviews, and basically all the systematic reviews, objective, sort of outside reviews that have been done, have shown the same thing. There just is no good evidence that these procedures actually accomplish what they're claimed to be accomplishing. And so this idea that it's sort of based on the best science, it's manifestly not based on the best science. In fact, it's now at this point directly in the face of the best science that we have available.
Well, I find it a little encouraging right now. I think I know a lot of things have happened, a lot of terrible things. I mean, the last 4 years were kind of horrific. It felt like we were just spinning out of control.
Mhm.
Now, with that, the cast review, with the changes happening that we hear about in Europe, and now, of course, with Trump in office, it feels like we might be making some progress. But I know in reality, because we just saw like Colorado pass some horrible laws,
Yep.
not in a good way. They've really dug the left has really dug in their heels. So what can we be doing? What should we be doing right now while we have support of executive leadership in America, at least?
Chris, why don't you go, and then I'll follow
Well,
up.
well, America's I think your specialty, Jay. You take this one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, no, okay, so this is, I mean, there have been a lot of really good things that have happened legislatively. Initially, it was at the state level. We've got more than half the states now that have prohibited most or all of these procedures for kids for purposes of so-called gender affirmation. Whether they survive or not, it sort of hangs in the balance at the moment. The Scarametti case that is before the Supreme Court it's a case brought with the Tennessee law that does that in Tennessee. We think that it's very likely the Supreme Court will uphold that, and so that means basically half the states, kids won't be having these procedures done. A number of the states also have laws now against secret social transitioning, so schools can't secretly change the pronouns and the names of children behind their parents' backs. That's terrific. A few states have now managed to define male and female, which nobody had bothered to do. Literally, no one had bothered to do this, including the federal government,
Wow.
until recently, because they thought, okay, well, yeah, we need to nail that down. So that's happening. But as you mentioned, Colorado, so the law in Colorado, which I don't think the governor signed it. And so the governor might veto it simply because of having national political aspirations. But the bill effectively weaponizes the Child Protective Services to take a child away from parents who refuse to affirm their child's stated gender identity. All right. And so, in other words, if you insist on referring to your son as a son, if he says he's a female, the Child Protective Services can take that child away. That's going to happen in some states. That's already happening kind of behind the scenes right now in a number, especially blue states. Heritage and some others worked to develop model legislation to do exactly the opposite, just to make it clear that the state can in no way define abuse to include simply affirming your child's actual sex. A few states have sort of picked that up. I think what we're going to have, weirdly, in the United States for the next few years is kind of the mother of all laboratories of democracy. This is a quote from a famous Supreme Court justice who talked about, democracy in the U.S. It's sort of laboratories of democracy. You have these 50 states that can do a lot of different things. And so in some states, these kids are going to be protected, and others, they're going to continue being subjected to this gender quackery. That's not how it's going to be permanently. But the momentum is definitely on our side. I've always maintained 3 years ago, I said within 5 years, the clinics will probably have to stop doing this because of a lawsuit. But we have got a long way to go, as you said, until children aren't told that they might be born in the wrong body. We will not have fully vanquished gender ideology. So that's the ultimate victory for us. But I think that could be the work of a generation. In the meantime, let's close the clinics. Let's sue the ones that refuse to close. And let's make as much progress as we can here, certainly in the next couple of years, because, of course, the president issued on January 20th 4 executive orders that advance different aspects of the fight against gender ideology. And opposing gender ideology is now the official position of the U.S. government and the official position of the Department of Defense and the Department of State in our foreign policy. So talk about a 180 change just in a few months.
I mean, that's incredible. So this is the United States. Now, Chris, you're traveling all over the world. What are you seeing worldwide? Are we seeing the same kind of wins? Are we up against worse? What does it look like?
So I don't want to be a downer, but I think sometimes we overrepresent the progress in Europe. So
Mm-hmm.
it is good. We've had progress in England. Under a Labour government, they banned puberty blockers. Not the cross-sex hormones. They're still doing those for 16 and up. Under the SNP government, Scottish National Party, they went a step further and banned the cross-sex hormones for children. They've all but stopped this in Finland and Sweden. And some other countries have some progress for sure, and some of their psychiatric associations are making progress. But there aren't actually any concrete bans. The children who were already on puberty blockers in England are still getting them. They still want to start a clinical trial into this in England. So they're going to be testing these out on some kids, which is just not ethical. You can't do this sort of trial in an ethical way. There's no such thing as a child being born in the wrong body. So why are you testing this out on any of them?
Mhm.
They're treating them like lab rats. And as far as I'm concerned, we already know the outcome. There's no such thing as a child being born in the wrong body. So trying to change their sex is never going to be good. This was never a problem for all of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way they've been able to justify this is by saying that kids are going to kill themselves if we don't transition them, which I can get into that in a second. But to answer your question more about globally, this is still a massive problem. This ideology is still spreading in many circles. Australia, where I just was, I don't think they've been exposed to the truth nearly as much as we have here in North America. And none of the parties will speak out against this. I did meet with individual politicians from actually pretty much every separate party, including the Greens even, which was surprising to me. But the Liberals down there, which is their more center-right party, and Labour, they're all pushing gender ideology. This is still being pushed very hard globally, all throughout Europe. The activists are even trying to get this into Africa in different areas and having some success. So we just need to keep raising the alarm about how absurd this entire ideology is, because until we do, the next time you get some leftist government in power in the US, they're going to try to bring some of this back.
Yep.
And it's ultimately the ideology that has to be defeated, because there's no truth to any of it.
Yeah, unfortunately, I feel like America, our biggest export really is culture. And we spent the last generation exporting a very horrific culture. And now we need to claw that back. And it's going to take
It,
time.
it didn't help that the US Agency for International Development was spending tens of billions of dollars exporting this around the world, but the Canadian government was doing the same.
Mhm.
Close to $20 billion. We even
Wow.
sent money to the Ukraine to do gender equitable demining of the fields with mines in them. There was something about having that done in a gender equitable manner. We spent money on that. I mean,
Wow.
this stuff gets as insane as you can possibly think. But we have this system all throughout the world. Globalism. What is globalism? Globalism are all these politicians basically in lockstep with each other to push these leftist agendas. It's coming from the UN, it's coming from the WHO, it's coming from the people who lead the World Economic Forum. And not everyone attending that forum is into this. I know, because I went to Davos just this last January, a couple months ago, 3 months ago, and I stood out on the street. And I got support from almost everyone attending, because a lot of them are just business people there to do business. They're there to take advantage of government largesse and do their business. And they all agree that we shouldn't be doing this to kids. So we need to push back at all these different levels. But until all the powers that be, who all work together and all think the same, and they all push the same bills all across the world, and what we're seeing now are all these censorship bills popping up, these efforts to legislate hate speech. Now, this won't pass in the US, of course, because they have the greatest constitution in the world. But in all these other countries, there's this push by all these leftist parties to push these censorship bills so that we won't even be able to talk about this. Like what just happened to me in Australia. Like what happened to this woman named Kira Smith in Australia, where she was censored because she said men shouldn't be chest feeding, where they take
Oh,
chemicals to secrete some substance to feed a baby from a man. And she got
yeah,
censored.
that's
She
pretty
got fired
tragic.
from her breastfeeding association that she worked at for 15 years. And this
Wow.
stuff's happening all over the world. It's happening all over England. They've arrested 12,000 people in the last year for social media posts. So
Wow.
the censorship goes hand in hand with gender ideology, because it's the same people pushing gender ideology who want to censor us. So we have a massive work to do globally. The greatest thing, as far as I'm concerned, this past year has been Doge and taking away the Agency for International Development's funding of all this all over the world. And of course, Trump's executive orders fighting the culture war. I think we've made huge progress. And they need to put pressure, the US government needs to put pressure on these other governments who are bringing these hate speech laws into effect. They need to ramp up the tariffs, as far as I'm concerned, on any country that's trying to push these hate speech laws, because right now, honestly, the US is pretty much the only beacon of light trying to stop this censorship across the world.
Well, that is scary but encouraging. Good, there's good and bad there. So I'm
There's
glad
good
to
and bad.
hear it. It's good to know that we've got some progress being made, and we just can't stop. So all right, I could talk with you guys all night long, like easily. It wouldn't even be a problem. But I have promised, of course, we have live Q&A. So I am going to ask our amazing moderators to bring up our first question from the audience. We have quite a few questions loaded up.
Great.
All right. So how do parents respond when the counselor for their 7th grade daughter informed them that they can no longer talk to us about what was said in a session? Too late for us. Our daughter is now a son 10 years later.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I'm
Well,
so sorry.
yeah, it's, I mean, if it's too late for them, I mean, the answer would be in general, if you have a counselor that tells you that, find another counselor. If this is a school counselor, find another school. If every school in your state is doing this, I mean, you have to think of this as an ideological detox. And so imagine if your child had been exposed to some kind of deadly pathogen that required your daughter, let's say a pathogen that required her to be in a particular climate. Like, let's say you're in a cold climate and you have to get her to a warm climate. You would do that. You would, if you had to, you would take her to a warm place. Think of it that way. She has been infected with a toxic ideology. The disease vector, the transmission of this is not, literal viruses and coughing or anything like that. It's ideas, it's social media, it's the curricula that's in the schools. And so what's happening is that kids that genuinely have distress, as Chris said, this ideology preys on the kids that are struggling, and it also, often preys on the awkward kids. And so there's genuine distress there. But what gender ideology does, it gives them an interpretive framework that basically says, all those things you're struggling with, you don't like your body, you don't like how the opposite sex is treating you, we can fix that because it just turned out, you're different than you thought you were. And so that, that's the sort of promise that maybe sounds good for about 10 years until you realize it was all a lie. And so honestly, it's, if you think about it as your small child has been, if the virus illustration works for you, fine. If not, brought into a weird death cult in the 7th grade, what would you do to help your child escape that? Now, you wouldn't cut off your contact with them, right? You wouldn't treat them cruelly, but you'd get them out of the situation and the environment that led to this. And if that's not possible, it's good. The child is eventually going to hope. It might be the child figures this out on his or her own, but I don't know of any other way to handle it in that situation. And Chris and I both know many, many parents, right, who got red pilled on this issue because their child got transitioned by a school. And they just, they did what they absolutely had to do. It's a little strange, but I mean, we're at the moment where parents may have to change the states where they live in order to extract their child from that. But that's why I think it helps if you think about it as a deadly virus, because there's no doubt in your mind that you'd do that if it was a deadly virus. But somehow we think, well, it's just an idea, they'll grow out of it. Well, maybe, or maybe it'll just get reinforced because they're still in the social environment that gave them this crazy idea in the first place.
Yeah, you need to sever any connection to this ideology. Friends, they shouldn't be on social media. Social media is the worst.
Absolutely.
It's honestly the number one culprit for all of this. I know people who've fallen into this by playing video games. A young woman came out with me at the University of Washington in Seattle. And at 16 years of age, she was struggling. I think there'd been some sexual abuse and she developed really early, and that's not fun for girls. And she was just a bit depressed, and she was playing video games, and 2 people online playing this game with her on the other side of the world convinced her the reason she was upset was because she was trans. So that same year, she went on testosterone and she had a double mastectomy at 16 years of age.
Oh my
They will
gosh.
book double mastectomies on first appointment. And you don't even have to go see a doctor. They'll do this via telehealth. A telehealth appointment, and a child can schedule a double mastectomy. That's where
Oh
we're
my
at,
gosh.
especially in a lot of these blue states. So,
Yeah,
and at 19, she went off testosterone. She said, my gosh, what have I done? Huge mistake. But, she's been permanently harmed. And
I think you make such a good point there. I just want to
Yeah.
reinforce of social media that we as parents we've unfortunately this generation, my generation, I feel like too many times we try to be the friend. Well, it's probably all generations. It is so incredibly important to stay involved with your kids and not let them just have unmonitored social media. Like it's so important.
Absolutely.
Even monitored, they don't need it. So we almost did like an experiment with our daughter. Our kids are thriving. They've never had social media. They're doing great. They're straight A's, academically, athletically, everything's great. But my daughter, who's in track and field now, she's going into grade 11 in September. She wanted Snapchat earlier this year because that's how the kids communicate.
Mm-hmm.
They
Yep.
don't text. And if you want to know where they're at or whatever, it's all on Snapchat. So I thought, okay, well, let's try this out for a couple days. My gosh, what a mistake. All these kids are so Snapchat's terrible. They're sending pictures which disappear. They're not themselves. My daughter was not herself the 2 days she was on this app. Now, they never take their phones into the bedroom with them at night. We don't allow that. But all these
Good.
other kids are up till midnight
Yep.
messaging
Or
back and
later.
forth, back and forth. They're not sleeping. It's terrible for their mental health. It's terrible for their education because they're not sleeping. And they don't need it. Our kids are doing great. And is it a problem that they're not on social media? Nope. So I think when you teach your kids and you never allow them to have social media in the first place, you don't run into this problem where 3 years later you're trying to take it away. And now they're addicted and now it's a fight.
And
But
if
yeah,
it's
social media is just terrible for adults. It's the worst thing
oh
for
yeah.
kids ever. And it's the cause of so many of these problems we see today.
Yeah, and I would like to say as a mom, I mean, I know we're parents here, but I encourage all parents out there, be willing to have that fight with your kids to stand up because you wouldn't let them inject heroin in their veins just because all their friends were doing it. So like it's a hard battle, but that's why that is our job as parents is to stand between our kids and the dangers of the world and help protect them. So
Yeah.
excellent
And if you
points
go at this
made.
the right way, they don't even want it. My kids don't want it. They know it's bad for them. So there was that one little
That's
Snapchat
true.
thing, but she realized herself, yeah, this is a mistake. And it hasn't had to be a fight. But yeah, I forget what the original question was. Oh yeah, about the what do you do about the child with the counselor? You have to sever every connection. I know
Yeah.
I have friends who were in Washington State. Their girl got affected by this, and then she pulled out, and she was doing better, and then it snuck in again. So you can't let your guard down. And then she came to believe, yeah, well, she really is a boy. So they moved to Florida to protect their
Wow.
kid because if the school counselor is getting involved, this happened to a woman in Victoria, British Columbia, who I helped for almost 2 years with this situation. The school counselor convinced this girl she was a boy. The parents were then getting outside help from a neutral, independent counselor. What did the school counselor do? She contacted social services. And Child Protective Services came to interview the mom, interview the dad separately. They'd been split up. This is very common in these situations as well. In more than half the cases, a parent is out of the picture or deceased. So it's always just some sort of trauma thing going on. But you can't have them in this situation. You have to treat this with the urgency that it requires and realize this isn't just some passing phase. This is something that could harm your kid forever, and you need to cut off all sources of the influence.
I agree. I think that summarizes it well. I'm going to ask now, let's see what our next question is. Moderators, bring something up for us. All right. What are you doing about the indoctrination of kids? I'm not entirely sure if this is a question specifically for each group here. Jay, maybe do you want to address this from the Heritage
Yeah.
Foundation?
Yeah. And so I mean, we're a public policy think tank, so we're not, we don't develop curricula and things like that. But our friend Bernadette Broyles at the Child and Parents' Rights Campaign has a really, really good church resource. So for Christians, it's not sort of Protestant or Catholic or Orthodox; it's sort of broadly Christian. Is a really good resource for teaching this. My friend Mary Hassan at the Ethics and Public Policy Center actually works specifically with Catholic dioceses on these things. It would be nice if we could count on the public schools to teach that boys are boys and girls are girls, right? And they should at least be able to teach the straight biology. But the truth of the matter is, if kids are completely unmoored, if they don't understand what it means to be human, if they don't understand why we have this kind of complementary nature. Men and women aren't opposites. There's not an opposite sex. There's the other sex. And there's this remarkable thing biologically. It takes exactly one fertile male and one fertile female to mate and can reproduce after their kind, can create the whole human race, right? So it's a remarkable thing. But if they don't sort of have a framework for that, it's really easy for them to get confused. And so my own view is that I hope they have a kind of broadly philosophical and kind of rich theological, at least framework and understanding for thinking of this, in which you can embed all the biological truths. Because of course, this is something that it's a great example where if you're religious, you've got religious teaching that conforms perfectly to what the best biology is going to teach you and what common sense teaches you. I mean, imagine this: for all of human history, in every culture, in every religion, in every language, we've had a distinction between males and females. And it's not just that we have the distinction, but we sort of mean different things by it, right? So it's not like if you're an English speaker and you meet someone in Mongolia, yeah, we have males and females, and then you discover that a third of the people you would call female, they call male. No, it matches up perfectly, right? We all mean that we all recognize whatever our social setting is, that's a male, that's a female. Now, why does that matter? That's the best possible proof you could have that biological sex is a real thing that we observe in the world, so that our ideas about sex are the result of just making sense of what's really in the world. These are not social constructs. These are not impositions by Western imperialist ideology. That's just crazy talk. And this is a sort of basic reality. So honestly, teaching kids really good, solid biology, and then helping them understand the wonder of the way in which we're constructed. I mean, the wonder of lactation, just to take one example in which a mother is feeding her child through her body. And if she is feeding her daughter, nursing her daughter in the morning, her breast milk's going to have more cortisol in it, which is what you'd want in the morning to kind of get her up and going. And if she nurses her in the evening, it's going to have more melatonin in it. I mean, this thing is layered with miraculous aspects to it. And I think, honestly, just getting into the realities of the biology by itself are wondrous. And if kids don't have that, they're much more likely, I think, to fall for these crazy things.
Yeah, I think I want to call back to everyone from Gender 101. One of the things that we quickly touched on was the idea of the importance of having these hard conversations, being the first one to talk about it with your kids, because there is some sort of authority that has been proven that when you're the first one to introduce it, that you just in general have this, I don't know, like first comer's advantage or something on
Yes.
it, that it's important for parents to talk about it. Now, obviously in an age appropriate way,
Sure.
but it is important to talk about these topics. And Chris, I'm not going to bring this one up on screen, but it's kind of what you're already doing. We have a request for you to, speaking of the Colorado bill, we have a request that you would come out to Denver to protest the horrible totalitarian bill that they're pushing. So just want to throw that one out there, that you've got a request from our people.
Yeah, I need more of me to be everywhere I need to be. But so I
You're
just want to
all
touch on that
over
real
it.
quick. I don't consider myself a protester. I've held a few protests, but I'm not really out there to protest. I'm out there to have conversations, and the signs are just really a solicitation for a conversation. It's different. I don't think I will have the odd protest, and I'm actually having one just before our Canadian election in a week and a half. But generally speaking, I think conversations are the way to go, not protests. I don't think protests do that much, to be honest. Now, I just want to touch on one thing Jay was just talking about there, and that question, what are you doing, was the question about this indoctrination of kids. So as a parent, your first responsibility is to your kids. And I would always recommend read to your kids at night, because that's when you have these great bonding moments. Maybe they're just trying to delay bedtime, but they'll tell you things that were going on in the day that you didn't know about.
Sure.
And at an age appropriate level, you give them the message, which I give all the time, which is our children are perfect just as they are. And there's this crazy idea going on around there that some kids were born wrong and need to change their bodies. And that's, of course, insane, because you're so beautiful and perfect just the way God created you. And now you've given them that truth at an age appropriate level. And you tell them, if they ever hear the word gender at school, you want to hear about it.
Yeah.
And you tell the teacher the first week of school. You find out their opinion on gender ideology. You ask them and you tell them you are not okay with your kid learning this. And you're going to find out right away if you have a problem teacher or not. Because most teachers aren't going to push this. There's no one holding a gun to their head making them teach your child gender ideology. It's usually teachers who themselves love this ideology and take it upon themselves to push it. But on a broader picture, we just have to tell the truth. Because as Jay was talking about the miracles of our bodies, the miracles of lactation, how breast milk changes from morning to night, there is such a thing as instinct. And the reason this ideology won't last is because we instinctively know it's wrong. The only way this gets popular is by people teaching it. You have to change what we instinctively know to be true. And you have to put these ideas into someone's head for them to believe them in the first place. Dogs know the difference between a man and a woman. Babies know the difference between a man and a woman. Instinct is a beautiful thing, and we have the truth on our side. There's no way this can possibly last. The only question is how many kids are going to be harmed before we do away with it. But we just have to keep having these conversations. We have to educate people about it, and you have to have faith that when you have that conversation and you teach someone about this, that they're going to have conversations, and it's going to grow. Like compounding interest as a financial advisor, it's going to grow. And over time, this is what we've seen. We're going to reach enough of the population that enough people say enough is enough, and we put a stop to this. So personally, what I'm doing, I need to get up to 5 or 10 million followers across all the different social media platforms, because then I think I can start to have more impact. And instead of 1 billion views a year, we're getting 10 billion or 20 billion, because this really is just a matter of starting conversations and teaching people the true message that our children are perfect just as they are.
And I absolutely love that, all of that. Two things I want to support. One, yes, kids always want to have those conversations late at night, but be open and ready for it, parents, because that is the time to talk about these things. And it probably is because they're delaying bedtime. But nevertheless, it's a great time to talk to them. So I think that's so valuable that you're saying that. And I just want to reiterate a thank you that is coming in from our audience, and just what I feel that you're doing of that one conversation at a time, because this gender ideology, all of these topics that we're covering at M4LU can be very overwhelming when you're looking at it just from that 30,000 foot view. But when you focus in on, I can talk to this person in front of me right now, and then maybe they'll talk to someone, and then they'll talk to someone. It's so much more encouraging because we can make a difference that way. And so I just appreciate everything that you're doing with that.
Yes, and I want to stress before I forget, I don't know how much time we have. Do we have another half hour still?
Yeah, we do. We have about
Okay.
27 minutes.
So with any movement, it's important to be positive. If you just complain about something, and the tendency with this, it's very easy to just get mad and to complain, and that's all totally understandable, and it's righteous anger. But you're not going to reach the average person on the street who doesn't really know anything about this when you're mad and when you're throwing around words like mutilation, and it depends on the context, because absolutely mutilation is going on. But what happens with some of these stronger words is it's so shocking to people that they get focused on the shock of it all, and they don't really hear the rest of what you're saying, and they maybe think automatically, oh, this person's kind of extreme and they're kind of fringe and they're kind of out there. So you need to approach this recognizing the person that you're dealing with. If they know nothing about it at all, you have to talk about it at a basic level and bring them up to that next level. You can't go from 0 to 100. And so just know your audience, but keep it positive, because the positive message that everyone agrees with is that our children are beautiful just as they are. No drugs or scalpels needed. They agree when you give the positive message that there's no right or wrong way to be a girl or a boy. They all agree, including the most rabid trans activist. They agree that we shouldn't be stereotyping our kids. They have a blind spot where they don't see that they're now pushing stereotypes to such a degree that they're saying kids need to change their body to match them. Because these people have been lied to. A lot of the people pushing this are young women who've just come out of university, for example. 9 out of 10 of the abusive comments I get on the street are from young women who have been indoctrinated. to believe that, first of all, that gender identities exist, that kids are going to kill themselves if we don't transition them. They believe that puberty blockers are reversible. These are the number 1 and 2 lies that you always hear. And so they believe they're helping these kids. Are they all evil? No, they're deceived. So there's no point just fighting with them. We have to find some common ground by saying things they agree with. We have to ask them questions, like the Socratic method of debate, to get them thinking. This is why in all my videos you see me asking people, well, what does it mean for a girl to be a boy? And you don't need to get them to agree with anything that day. Just get these questions going so that when they go home, they're stuck trying to answer this question. And eventually they're going to come to the realization that this whole thing is based on ridiculous stereotypes. But we don't really need to reach the radicals on the far left. We just need to reach the normal people. So when you're talking to the normies in the middle of the political spectrum, if they know nothing about it at all, just bring them to the next level. And if they're already pretty well read on it or whatever, try to bring them to that next level, because it's about starting conversations and it's about continuing conversations and it's about educating the population. And you can't educate the population when you're just mad all the time and saying negative things.
I really appreciate you saying that because I think, unfortunately, Moms for Liberty moms have occasionally gotten a bit of a bad reputation at school boards because the media likes to take little clips.
Mhm.
And I mean, these are, yeah, it's in topics that just absolutely are incensing. How do you not get angry about it? But you are exactly right that we need to maintain calm. And both of you, I've listened to so many of your interviews and it's been fantastic. I just want to encourage the audience that if you're think of this as anything else, if it's something you care about, you for your job, whatever your job is, right? You would research it, you would prepare, you would take some time to understand it. And I can say that taking time to research and listen to the conversations that these two speakers have will prepare you yourself to have conversations in your life. So I just wanted to say that because I've learned so much from both of you. Okay, so I'd like to bring up another question because I feel so bad. These are such great conversations and we have so many questions to get to. Let's see what we can talk about next. For Chris, how hard is it to balance using social media to deliver this message while also knowing how dangerous and unhealthy it is?
I don't know. I'm a 49-year-old man. People can say whatever they want to me. I know who I am. My wife knows who I am. My kids know who I am. So there are a lot of lies floating around out there. Just some of the most awful things. But you just have to ignore it. I try not to read all the comments anymore because it's just full of lies and stuff. But just know who you are and know what cause you're fighting for. I decided before I started off on this little adventure, I knew, of course, a whole bunch of lies were going to come and attempts to cancel me. But I said this in some speech the other day, we're all going to be dust in 50 years. In 100 years, nobody's going to remember our names. And I'm not saying this to be a downer again, but it's true. We're worried about drama on Earth today when children are having body parts removed, when perfectly healthy children are having their puberty stopped, when hundreds of thousands of children have come to believe they're born wrong. It's so psychologically abusive. So have some bigger perspective about this and stop worrying about what the haters are going to say and just do what you know is right, because you're going to be able to live with yourself and you're going to be proud of yourself, and your kids and your family are going to be proud of you too, because we have truth on our side.
I love that. I think also it's valuable for everyone else to see it. Like just because we understand the dangers of social media, presumably we're trying to balance as well as adults, but you're reaching people who may not feel that way. So you're leveraging a platform that is ubiquitous in society, and I think that's critically important. Personally, I think you're
Yeah,
doing a
and the
good
haters
job.
are loud, but they don't represent most people. If you have 100 comments on a post, and I get mostly beautiful comments because I have blocked all the haters, but you know, th- if you post a nice video, a positive video, they don't get as much play because unfortunately in this world, it's the crazy stuff that goes super viral. But I'm having wonderful conversations 9 times out of 10 out there. I get nonstop support. And the people who might be afraid to comment, but who support you, they're still watching your videos. They're still reading the truth that you're posting, and you're still reaching them. And you just have to not worry about what the negative people say, because they don't matter.
What about you, Jay? I see you on I've podcasts all over the place. I guess I don't
Mhm.
necessarily see as many other posts, but I will
Yeah.
transparently say that I'm not a huge Twitter person or
Yeah.
X. Sorry, X. I keep forgetting that.
Yeah, I mean, Chris is doing something unique because he is down on the street very often in very prominent places. I mean, I've been with Chris a few times here in DC, and it's he doesn't just pick random places. It's where he's likely to have some really important conversations, and so there's an inherent risk in that. The inherent risk of honestly the kind of stuff I do, public speeches that are advertised publicly are iffy because you need an event, and so you're going to if you're going to deal with this issue and you're going to speak publicly about it, and those events are going to be announced, you just have to have security. But the thing about security is that the primary function of security is, well, make sure it's visible, and then it has a strong deterrent effect. And so by having security, in a sense, you very often prevent a situation in which you would need security. There's sort of irony, except for the just genuine crazy that doesn't get the social signals that they're going to get tackled, right? But it's minor stuff. I mean, some of my friends, and I know Chris would say the same thing. For some reason, it's the women that are involved in this that get the vilest stuff you can possibly imagine texted to them, direct messaged. I've had people sort of threaten me and say nasty things, but not just utterly bizarre from the pit of hell stuff. And I don't know why that is, except I have my own theories. I think this ideology is at least in part about the hatred of the female and the female form. And that's why, notice it's not women, first of all, men wouldn't care that much, but there's not that big of a problem with women trying to invade men's locker rooms. It's always in the other direction. And as Chris mentioned, earlier, actually this evening, when you have a man that is, say, 40 years old, and maybe he's married and he's had a couple of kids, that decides to transition, that is almost always a different thing from what we're dealing with these kids. With kids, there's a distress about their body and things like that. With men, as Chris said, this is something called autogynephilia, which no one wants to talk about, but this is a known thing. And it's literally it starts as a kind of kink in which a man, he's sexually aroused by wearing women's clothing. He's sexually aroused by dressing like a woman. And you go down that path, they can eventually get to the point where they're sexually aroused by the thought of having female body parts, right? Now, that is obviously, first of all, you can tell if they think they're going to be a woman, that's not what it means to be a woman. That's the weirdest thing anybody's ever heard of. But it's a different thing. And so then, men that are into these kinds of things, look, it's perfectly reasonable that you wouldn't want men like that in women's spaces and in women's prisons. And even if those individuals would not themselves put the women at risk, if you have a policy as a state or a country that all a man has to do is claim to be a woman, then he's going to get moved to the women's prison. Well, I mean, you're going to have a major rush to the women's prison because obviously any convicted criminal that's a male would much prefer to be in a women's prison for obvious reasons. And so even if the individuals that are autogynephiles were not themselves putting women at risk, it's just opening the door to the sexual predators. And that's exactly what we found. And so I get the most mad for some reason now talking about women's prisons, in part because they don't have very many people to represent them. We don't know what, they're in prison. And so we don't tend to hear from them. And so in some ways, they're the most voiceless ones at the moment in this. And I mean, no civilization puts male criminals in a prison with women. That's just one of the most obvious things. And yet that's the kind of stuff that's happening. And I think it only really makes sense if you kind of conclude that this is in part, this ideology is about hatred of the female form.
Which has been so challenging as a woman, I can say, watching this and wondering why are women not fighting this more? Why do we? And I'm happy to see women. I feel like the media at least is paying attention to women more, but it's hard. It is challenging.
It is. And I
Okay.
mean, it's been said, it's that many young women, unfortunately, have been indoctrinated in college. And so, strangely, the very people whom you would
Okay.
expect to object actually are indoctrinated in this way. Though, to give credit where credit is due, it was some radical feminists in the UK that were actually sort of the first ones to start fighting this when almost no one else was doing it.
Which I'm happy to say will have actually some pretty self-claimed radical
Mhm.
feminists on for our watch party.
Right.
Everyone stay tuned for that on April 29th. You're going to want to see that. That's really good. Okay, so I have one way that I want to wrap this up.
Mhm.
Although I realized there was a question I meant to ask you in the very beginning. And so I'm going to ask this one really quick too. So I've technically got two more questions. First one is, when you're having these conversations, lots of people, Chris in particular, but Jay, I'm sure you can speak to this one too. A lot of people come back to this idea, especially the sign of puberty blockers. They say, oh, but you can just turn it off. You can just restart puberty. But that is not proven to be correct, right? Can you talk to the downfalls of puberty blockers just for a minute?
Okay, so pardon my language here, but someone should tell that to the men in their 20s who have a micropenis for life. Ask them if puberty blockers are reversible. Now, this is a sales pitch, and this is the number 2 argument you always hear. Number 1
Mhm.
is suicide, but this is a sales pitch where the trans activists say puberty blockers just buy the child time to explore their gender identity without having to incur the terrible trauma of their secondary sex characteristics developing. Because the theory goes, if I were to steel man the trans activists' argument, it's,
Mhm.
well, it's going to be too traumatic for these children to develop, so we need to keep them looking neutral. And while we're keeping them looking neutral, they explore their identity, and then they can decide what puberty they want to go through. This is how they think, as though a
Mhm.
girl going on testosterone is going through male puberty. She's not. She's a girl who's having her puberty blocked, and she's taking testosterone. That's what's happening. But we know from gender clinic statistics themselves, depends on the clinic, 98%, 100% of the time, these children do not just go on puberty blockers and then come off. They stay on the puberty blockers and they progress to the opposite sex's hormones. Because guess what? When they go to that gender clinic, they're not there to explore their gender identity. They've already bought into this lie that they were born in the wrong body and they need to look like the opposite sex. That's why they're at the gender clinic getting puberty blockers. They're there for
Absolutely.
the 2-step process, the blockers and the hormones of the opposite sex. So what happens is they stay on them, and those years of development are gone. You don't go through puberty when you hit 20. If you come off puberty blockers at 18, those years of development are gone, and you don't get to catch up. There's no time machine. So it's just a lie. It's all it is. It's just a lie. Yes, if they went on puberty blockers for a couple months and came off, not too much harm done. But that's not what's happening. And the other thing that's important about this is when you look at the academic studies, not that we need these, but when you look at all the studies that were done before we started giving kids these drugs and hormones, when this affected maybe 1 out of 30,000 kids, and mostly boys, effeminate little boys, more than 80% of them, when they went through puberty, they grew out of it. Their gender dysphoria, their gender identity disorder, their distress evaporated. It desisted. And a majority of them were same sex attracted as adults. So the cure for this in the vast majority of cases is puberty itself. Now we block the cure.
Like the Karen, as Chris said, this is what is called iatrogenic effect. So the putting a child on puberty blockers makes it very likely that the child will continue down the transition pathway. Whereas if we hadn't done that, it's more likely than not that the child would have resolved the gender dysphoria at some point. So it's doubly perverse. Of course, we could go on and talk about the actual physical effects in terms of bone development and other things that are lost. But just kind of a simple rule for everyone listening, a surefire way to determine, is this doctor lying or not? Here's the test. Is the doctor advising that someone take something that doesn't have any side effects? Because saying that it's entirely reversible, right, is implying that it has no side effects. In other words, implying that there's zero risk involved. There are no drug interventions that are zero risk. And so if a doctor is telling you
Yeah.
that, it's just a lie. You don't need to know anything else to know that, okay, this person's either deceived or directly lying. So that
Yeah.
one's simple as long as you're thinking clearly.
And I'll add one more thing to this because it's important. The words of the trans health professionals themselves expose that lie. Dr. Marcy Bowers is the president of WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. He says that of the boys who started on puberty blockers at Tanner stage 2, which is the technical term for the start of puberty. For girls, this is going to be a couple years before they've even had their first period. So these kids are 10, 11 years old. He says with the boys specifically, when started at Tanner stage 2, he knows of none of them who as adults have ever been able to have an orgasm. They have
Oh, wow.
destroyed their future adult sexual function. And he goes on to say, and intimacy is important in relationships. So what do? Do we start the puberty blockers later? Do we stop them for a while and let some puberty occur? It's a mystery. He's literally spitballing on a live Zoom call with these other trans health professionals like Johanna Olsen Kennedy from the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. They don't know what they're doing. This whole thing is an unregulated experiment on kids. And it all started because of one doctor in the Netherlands who was dealing with this girl with distress who got the idea, well, if we prescribe her these gonadotropin releasing hormone analogs, which is the technical term for this drug, which was approved for prostate cancer and endometriosis and uterine fibroids. Well, if we give the kid this drug, it'll also happen to stop puberty. Because what this drug does is it stops you from producing estrogen, it stops us from producing testosterone. And so this was just an idea from one doctor, which then became the Dutch protocol where they gave them cross-sex hormones at 16. This was then exported to the United States of America and other countries, where over time, all the safeguards have been completely eliminated. But this has never been approved by any jurisdiction in the world, by any health authority. It's never been approved by the Food and Drug Administration or Health Canada or anyone, anywhere, because there's never been a single clinical study into it. And it shouldn't be allowed. We need to ban it. But anyway, yeah, the boys, they lose that ability. And Marcy Bowers will also tell you, again, this is the president of the big organization. He'll say that when they start puberty blockers at Tanner stage 2, this precludes the ability to preserve fertility. They don't even have the option of harvesting eggs or harvesting sperm so that the children can have children in the future through IVF or whatever. It precludes that ability. They know they're sterilizing kids. And you have this doctor from the BC Children's Hospital where he admits on video that he sees these kids into their 20s and he gets these 25-year-olds coming in and they want to have a family now, but they can't because they're sterilized. Where's the reversibility there? And he says, yeah, the dog's not doing it for you, is it? As though having a family pet is a replacement for having children. So they know they're doing this to all these kids and they keep doing it anyway. They're certainly not reversible.
Well, as we are coming up on the very end, I mean, I'm so glad you answered that because I think that is one of the biggest arguments that people need to fight back. So I'm going to hand it off to both of you to just wrap us up in this final question of what are the key takeaways? What are the key arguments, the key statements or facts that we should, if we can't remember all the things, what are those top 1, 2, or 3 things that will set us up for a successful conversation?
Yeah, I mean, the first is probably just to understand exactly what we're talking about, because most people that think they support this don't even actually understand what gender ideology is. So understanding that it ultimately denies the reality of sex, and most people just don't get it. So that's probably the first thing. The second thing is what we've talked about, that there's just there is absolutely no good evidence that this actually supports kids. I suppose the third thing is for people to analyze, okay, what would it mean actually to be born in the wrong body? I mean, what does it even mean to say that a male could be born in a female body? Because what we understand by male is bodily. And so it's harmful to kids. There's no good evidence. And the whole thing is just ultimately incoherent. And if you want to keep up with the science, because obviously not everybody can do that, there's an organization that we really rely on called the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, segem.org, that does a really great job of just keeping up with the literature. So most people aren't going to be reading the literature, but you can get a nice summary and updates at Segem that, just it's kind of give you a sense of what's happening in the literature. And do not worry about public forums where somebody's going to spring some great study on you. It does not happen. They'll claim that the science is behind this stuff, but they're not going to do it because it's a lie. So just have confidence.
Awesome. I love it. Chris, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, to that last point, people ask me, Chris, what's the most intelligent argument you've ever heard? Well, I haven't heard one yet. They have nothing. The whole premise of gender ideology is that your gender is a feeling and it's separate from sex. And these young people believe it. So if gender is a feeling based on what is the next question to ask them? They can't tell you. So it's all based on a spectrum of femaleness to maleness, which is all based on stereotypes. And as the genderbread person will tell you, this cute little image of a gingerbread man, it says your gender identity is based on your personality, your job, your hobbies, your likes and dislikes, your roles in society, and expectations upon you. These are all sexist and regressive stereotypes. That's all there is to gender ideology. The whole thing is nonsense. So that's the number one thing to understand. It's all nonsense. We don't have a gender identity at all. We have personalities, and personalities don't require a sex change. So just keep it positive. Affirm that we're all perfect just as we are. Whether you believe in God or evolution, this makes no sense. If you believe in God, gender ideology teaches God made us wrong. If you believe in evolution, these activists are therefore saying that somehow a billion years of natural selection failed, and we need pharmaceutical companies to help our children.
That's a really good point, which I had never thought of that argument. That's a very good one.
Wow, thank
All
you,
right.
AbbVie Pharmaceuticals, for saving my child and affirming their gender. Thank you for this drug. I mean, it's
Yeah,
totally nonsense. So just tell the truth, keep learning the truth, keep having these conversations, try to keep it positive, try to stay calm, and try to reach the normies. We don't need to reach the radicals. Just reach the normies, go talk at your school board meetings, and raise hell, Mama Bears, because we're going to win.
I agree. Hang in there, everyone. All right, so let's close it out with, gentlemen, please let everyone know where they can find you and follow you, get in touch, and stay on top of what you're sharing.
Absolutely. For me, it's heritage.org at the Heritage Foundation. And the best way to follow me is actually, I know, Missy, you don't go there, but X. And so I'm at Dr. J. Richards at X.
So I'm Billboard Chris on all the social media. I actually just started Facebook. I really started it because I had an impersonator on there trying to get money. But I realized how powerful it is because so many of the moms are on there and
Yeah.
those videos are getting seen a lot. But the best place to watch my videos would be, I guess, Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube because they're all in one spot. Best place for commentary is obviously X. I've got a website as well. And I just started a nonprofit, which I haven't technically launched yet. It is launched. I'm just
Oh,
waiting for the IRS letter. But it's called We Speak Truth. And if people want to support that, please reach out to me. It's going to have a global focus, but it's tax deductible for Americans, and we have a lot of work to do. So a little bit of help
awesome.
there would be great. But just keep having conversations because one conversation at a time, we're going to stop this child abuse.
I love it. Well, thank you both so much. This has been absolutely fantastic. I know you've got a lot of things to do tonight, so I'm going to let you go. And I want to thank everyone for joining us for this incredible conversation with two real leaders in this space. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I know I learned a ton, and I always do every time I watch these guys. So it's really fantastic. So just to wrap up, we have had a really great month already just with our two events we've got so far. We've got Gender 101 last week. Again, go check out Moms for Liberty YouTube channel, and you'll be able to catch the recording of that. Tonight, this will be recorded as well, or it is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch the recording of the live stream probably tonight or tomorrow if it's not immediately available. And Stay tuned though. We've got some other great events coming up the rest of this month. So next Wednesday on the 23rd at 1 p.m. Eastern is our book club discussion. And that brings in the conversation or the book what we were talking about earlier with Ryan T. Anderson, When Harry Became Sally. This is a really fantastic book. Last month we had a very easily readable book on when we were reading Restorative Justice. This one is also actually is very easy to read. And it really just presents the whole topic and everything that goes into it. It has gone into it in such a digestible format. So I did include if you go to the event webpage on the Moms for Liberty portal, you will see book reviews that you can catch as well that kind of summarize it if you don't have time to go through the whole book. But the audiobook is great. Strongly recommend it. It's very, very good. And then on Tuesday, on April 29th, we have our watch party, which I am so incredibly excited to bring this film to you. It's called No Way Back, The Reality of Gender Affirming Care. And it is just incredibly powerful. It is a detransitioner documentary that really dives into the medical catastrophe that we are facing, and it is absolutely powerful. So please join us. That's going to be at 6:30 p.m. Eastern with a live Q&A afterwards with Joey Bright, the executive producer, and Stephanie Wynn, who has her own podcast, Some Kind of Therapist. So it's going to be a really great event. So coming up in May, then, if you thought gender ideology was crazy, buckle your seatbelts, because May is absolutely just going to round us off in a crazy way when we'll learn about comprehensive sexuality education and this spreading, quite frankly, across the world. And so you do not want to miss that. We've got so many good events and speakers for you with that. So thank you all again for joining us. You can check us, see all of our past content as well at m4lu.org. Please feel free to support us if you agree with our mission and what we're working for. And of course, as was famously said by James Madison, the advancement and diffusion of knowledge is the only true guardian of liberty, which, as you know, is the mission for Moms for Liberty University. So thank you again and have a wonderful, wonderful evening.